Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. This is No Small Endeavor. You're listening to our unabridged interview with Russ Taff. Russ is a six-time Grammy winner, a bucket load of Dove Awards, I think a three-time inductee into the GMA Hall of Fame. And one of the things that was delightful to have Russ here come sit in the little studio space here at the house with me one day was that my friend Buddy Green, who used to be a regular artist in residence on our live shows, told me many years ago, said, you need to sit down with Russ Taff. You would love Russ Taff. And then more recently, my friend Steve Taylor, who had just produced a brand new album of covers by Russ, said, you need to listen to this album. And so it gave me a wonderful opportunity to sit down with Russ and hear his stories, and a beautiful story, a struggle of grappling with himself and his own demons and the things that he was handed as a young boy, and then finding some way forward in the world. Beautiful interview, and it's a beautiful new album. You should check it out. It's coming out here about the time we're releasing this episode. So go out and check out Russ's new album. Enjoy this interview with Russ Taff. Hailed by Billboard magazine as the single most electrifying voice in Christian music, Russ Taff has garnered 6 Grammy Awards, 16 Dove Awards, and was inducted into the GMA Hall of Fame an unprecedented 3 times as a soloist, as a member of the Imperials, and as a member of the Gaither Vocal Band. Russ's legendary career has now spanned over 4 decades and touched millions of lives. Welcome, Russ Taff.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great to have you with us. As I mentioned to you earlier today, we've got several mutual friends who've a long time said you need to know Russ and meet Russ. So I've been looking forward to talking to you for at least a decade. So
thank you, man.
I'm really glad.
Thank you.
Really glad to have you here.
Steve Taylor has been building you up too, so you better be brilliant.
Well, I hate to disappoint you from the start. So a career in music. I wonder, what's your very earliest memory of making music or listening to music?
Well, I grew up in a real small church. The daddy pastors, like 20 people, and
this was in California.
And there was time, and so music was a big part of our church. And my mother was an incredible singer with her sisters, and she told me that I sang my first solo in church when I was 4. And she stood me up on the altar, and, I did my song, of course, and that was, I would do that periodically, maybe once or twice a month. And
do you remember that very first time?
Kinda.
Yeah.
And then I sang I have 4 brothers, and we sang together that maybe, once or twice a month in church, and we would do quartet music. That's all that was around at the time was quartet music. And so we had a little quartet. And
are you singing like a cappella quartet stuff?
No, we had a piano player, and that was about all that was in the church was a piano player. And we sang together till I had 2 of my older brothers go to Vietnam, and then I started singing outside the family for the first time. But no, music was just always a part of my life, and it was the thing that when that household just exploded with trauma and addiction, and that was always a safe place that I would.
That music was?
Yeah, music was that place that it would just take me away from all that was going on in that house, and I would like when I was 13, Mom taught me to play guitar, and through the week, I would learn a song, the chords and everything, and I'd take my little cardboard box guitar on Sunday nights, and they'd let me do a song. I mean, I was short and slow, and so you can't play sports fair. I was always the last one they picked. So music just, it was the thing that would just take me away from everything, and I felt peace and excitement and joy, and my world went away for just a little while. So music was my refuge. It really, really was.
What, any recollection of any earliest songs you were singing at that time, or remember singing in the church?
I remember one, the Statesman Quartet, Jake Hess, called "Oh What a Savior," and it would always make me cry. Just talking about him coming to die for us, and of course I
is that one that da 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 da
Yeah.
da da da. Oh, that's
yeah.
it's such a moving, beautiful old hymn.
So that's one I remember.
Wow, huh? Yeah,
And Lord, we did so many over the years, but when there's trauma, there's a lot of memories that you don't remember.
Yeah.
You just have bits and pieces from it. But
yeah,
music was my wonderful, happy place.
yeah, yeah. So, your family, I think I read that you had a grandfather that was in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of tell us a little bit about his and how your family came to be in California.
Okay, he had a farm outside Hot Springs, and he tried, and back during the Prohibition and stuff, all the farms just kind of started dying out there, and so he started running moonshine, and they lived pretty far outside of town. He had his farm there. Mom told me that he would make moonshine, and she and her sisters would bury it at different places. So if they got busted, they still had a lot of gallons of moonshine there that they could do. But of course, revenuers were all over the Ozarks at the time, and he got caught. But the story was that he was carrying 2 20-pound bags of sugar because it was such the main ingredient in making moonshine, and that was his income. And so he was trying to run with these, and they caught him, and he spent a year in prison. And they were building ships during the Second World War out in L.A., and so he went out there by himself and got a job in the shipyards. And then the kids, he sent grandma came, and then his 4 daughters and his son all began to migrate out that way. And when the shipyard building was over, he went north up by Fresno to the San Joaquin Valley because it's farm. I mean, everything grows out there. So then we all just kind of migrated up. And when Dad got home from the Second World War, he and Mama went there to live. And that was just home for the first 15 years of my life.
Yeah. And how did your parents meet then?
Well, Hot Springs, Arkansas, there was a big Army-Navy hospital and wounded soldiers, traumatic things, and that sort of thing. And Dad was a sergeant there. And a lot of soldiers, they would bring there to recuperate, to heal. And Mom worked at a little, it was called the Pink Elephant. It was a little meat and three kind of place. And he would go in and eat there. It had a really fancy for her, but she was so shy. She was just so shy, a little country girl. And so the story was that he said, I'm buying some presents for my family at home in Missouri. And so she would go with him and help him shop, and they would have coffee and things like that. And then eventually, when they started getting kind of close, he fessed up that, well, I don't have any family. I was just trying to get you to go out with me. So they dated a few years and got married, then headed to California also.
Okay. So he goes off to the war.
Yeah.
And then comes back, but has been married prior to the war.
No, he married her after the war. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Yeah. And then I would assume, given your father's experience, pretty hard scrabble life after he comes back from the war, or what's their life like at that point?
Yeah, it was, because he was a pretty heavy drinker. And when he came back, there were just periods of him just, I don't know if it's memories from the war. He never talked. They just never talked. But he would pull benders and things like that. But it took him a while to kind of get his legs out from underneath him, and he had a what we call getting saved, where you go down to the front and ask Jesus to come into your heart, and his life really changed. It really changed, and he was a welder. He repaired farm machinery out there, and Mama picked up walnuts, picked grapes, worked at Sunkist factories, all fruit, and so they both worked just to kind of make ends meet.
Yeah.
But every month she would save enough money to buy 2 LPs. And she loved Mahalia Jackson, black, and Vestal Goodman, white. But no TV, no radio, no newspapers, no magazines, nothing. Nothing. We were just kind of over in the corner waiting for Jesus to come back. And, women didn't shave their legs, and no jewelry, and no cologne.
And so was that because of the financial expense of it, or was it other reasons for that?
It was that... it was almost cultish. Where that's what they did. No pants. Women didn't wear pants. Didn't shave their legs. And
so this was church context.
Yeah,
that was driving this.
The church that he committed to Christ in. That was what they did. It was very old school. Very legalistic. A lot of guilt around all that. So that's just the path that they followed.
Yeah. And what's your earliest memories of realizing that sort of you use language cultish? When did you start getting a vibe of what's kind of going on around you? Or is it a long time until you began to look at it with a different set of eyes?
Well, that was my life,
Yeah.
And we were in church 4 nights a week and Sunday morning. So 5 times a week you're in that building, and
4 nights a week beats most everybody I've ever heard.
Then Sunday morning, got to throw that in there. And so it was. It was just, that's just what we thought everybody did until I started getting a little bit older, and I began to see, I think I went and visited my cousin's church. They went to more of a Baptist-y kind of church. And I began to see this is a lot different than everybody else, to the point I wouldn't invite any of my friends because they rolled on the floor and they spoke in tongues and, just that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they weren't involved with the world hardly at all.
So this is like go to the Baptist church and turn right and go a long ways. Is that what you're describing?
Yes.
Yeah. So how large did you say this is like a 20, 30 person
Yeah,
church?
just 20. And a lot of them were just migrant workers. And when they would, pickers would come from Mexico, they would come up and they would pick fruit for seasons. And the church would go up by like 3 people. And then when picking season was over, we'd go back down to 20 instead of 23.
Yeah.
But most of them were just field workers.
Yeah.
And not a lot of, Dad only went to the 8th grade. And so there was a lot of love for Jesus, but no wisdom. No wisdom.
And then at some point, your father kind of gets sideways with the church?
Mm-hmm. My dad was the face of God. He was tall, charismatic, and very charismatic preacher. And I was 7 years old, and Dad didn't come to church. He was late, and he worked 6 days a week, and Mom sent me home. We lived a half a block from the church, and she said, go check on your dad and tell him that service has started. So I run home, and I go into our little shotgun house, and I heard him singing in the back, their back bedroom, but it sounded weird. It didn't sound like my dad. And I go back there and I look in that room, and it wasn't my dad in that bed. And so I ran and got Mom and brought her back home. And as soon as she saw Dad, his name was Joe, she just started crying, saying, "Oh, Joe, oh, Joe, oh, Joe," because we didn't know that he was an alcoholic before he found religion. And so that started the rest of his life of having like 1 year sobriety and then relapsing, 6 months sobriety and relapsing. And that went on till he died. But yeah, that's when the music stopped. And unfortunately, and it happened again, they asked us to leave the church at 7, and a lot of them were family members.
They asked you to leave the church when you were 7.
Well, because Daddy, you can't have a pastor drunk. But I remember when I was 13, and I was going down Sunday night and playing my guitar, singing, and Dad relapsed big time. And Mama, because I was a guy, man, whatever, sent me down to the church so I could hear what everybody said so I could go back and tell her. And I just sat there and cried. And I go home and I tell her. But Sunday night, they voted him out on Friday. And so Sunday night, I got my little cardboard box guitar and I head down there and I opened the front door to walk in. And my uncle, who had taken over interning kind of pastor, grabbed me by the arm and he said, "Russ, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to sing my song." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "Uncle, I didn't do anything wrong." And he said, "I don't care. You're his son and we don't want you here." And so I walked back home crying. And so the world that I knew of music, and it just stopped. And I had no place to go. And the worst beating I ever got in my life was I was 9, and you can't talk outside the family. You just can't. And because you're supposed to be perfect. Nobody is, but that's what they teach. The pastor's supposed to be. And I told a little friend I was spending the night with that Mom and Dad had an argument. And my older brother heard me, and he told Mom, and she was waiting for me when I got back home. And when I walked in, she made me sit down, and she just started screaming at me, "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." And came over and started slapping me in the face and screaming, "You don't tell anybody what goes on in this family." And I wound up just balled up in the corner with her just kicking and screaming. She was a rageaholic. I mean, she was, that I had to wear long sleeve shirts to school for like 2 weeks because of all the bruises and stuff. So, but then it started when I was 12, and they call it emotional incest, where one of the parents turned to one of the children like a spouse to talk to. And for some reason, my mother chose me. I had 3 older brothers, but for some reason, she chose me. And she would come into my bedroom, and I'd have to sit up, and she would just start dumping her fear and saying, "We're probably not going to be able to make our house payment next month, and I don't know if we'll have lunch money," and all her fear, because she couldn't talk outside the family either. And so she would put all of it on me, and then she would go to bed, and I'd sit up all night just terrified. And this went on night after night after night. But during that time, somebody told me that Jesus could be your friend. Now, there wasn't a lot of teaching at this church. It was all emotion. And so during my music career, I mean, there was no place to go. Nobody wanted me. So, and nobody was coming. My family members, "Russ, how are you?" You know, we were just shunned. And Mama had a key to the church, and when she would just dump on me and just scare the ever-loving hell out of me, I would go down there and I would open up the church like 11 o'clock at night, because when the addiction's going in the home, you can stay out till 5 in the morning. Nobody cares. And I would feel my way to the front and not turn on the lights because we were in a neighborhood, and if they saw lights and no cars, and I would just sit on a pew, or I'd kneel at the altar, and I would just start telling Jesus how scared I was. And that was the only place I could talk. And like I said, somebody said he can be your friend. So night after night after night, after she would dump on me, I would go down there and just sit and talk to him like I'm talking to you and tell him how scared I was, how afraid, and I don't know what's going to happen and what's happening in our home. And but somehow that made a connection between he and I that wasn't like anything else. And it wasn't like a Pentecostal church. It was a kid sitting and talking to a higher power that he really didn't know, but just telling him what was going on in my life. And then I would go home and I'd feel a little better and get up and go to school. But it was a lonely teenage year, just those early teenage years anyway.
So during that time when your father is relapsing, getting sober, relapsing, getting sober, what's kind of become your role in the family in that?
I was the peacemaker. I was the one that kept everything together, and Mama really leaned on me, and my brothers just checked out as soon as they could.
Were you the oldest?
No, I was number 4.
Number 4.
Number
okay.
4 until then, Vietnam. They both went when they were 19, and so I became the one that was between Mom and Dad. When all these fights would break out and stuff, and at 15, I made the decision for us to move back to Arkansas. Mom just collapsed. I mean, she just collapsed, and she was the only one working, and she was frying hamburgers at the time, and Dad couldn't work. So there was a church in Hot Springs that Dad would hold revivals in the summer, and they knew what was going on, and they called Mom and said, "We will help if you think you can make it back here." And so got a guy that could drive. Mama couldn't drive, and I wasn't old enough, but we found this guy to drive us, and we just loaded Daddy in the back of the station wagon drunk and took off driving to Hot Springs. And he sobered up for 2 years, and did really good. And then relapsed again, and they asked us to leave that church. But so anyway, I left home at 17, and the hardest thing of it, and well, there's a lot of hard things, but the message that we were given, me and my brothers, and it was given to them by their parents, is daily: you're not worth the bullet to shoot you with, not worth the salt that goes on your bread, and you will never amount to anything. And after a while, you start believing it, There wasn't a whole lot of parenting going on. Everybody was just trying to survive. And so shame was just something that, it was like a jacket that fit really good, really, really good. And I could put it on so fast. First of all, that transferred shame of what was happening with Dad and the way I was treated, and then just made to feel unworthy, that you're not good enough from that religion, and you'll never be good enough, and you got to try harder. And it was always holding a carrot out in front of the donkey, but you could never catch it. You had to do more, had to do better. And I don't know. So I was my senior year of high school. I was 16. They put me in early when I was a kid so Mama could work. But I put a little band together, and there was no contemporary Christian music we couldn't find anywhere. And so just for our high school, and I always loved Jesus. I always did, even with all the chaos and everything. It was going down at church and talking to him. And so we put together this little band, and just as an outreach, because we were just wanted to tell other, our peers about our experience with Jesus, and that he's real and he's alive, that sort of thing. And that was a part of the religion, is evangelism. And I asked the principal if he would let my little band play at an assembly. And I was after him like 3 months, and finally he said, okay. And so when the assembly was over, we played 2 songs, and Dad was pastoring and doing well. And I said, can we have a Monday night service that none of the deacons and elders would come to? And he kind of worked it out. So Monday night, it was just full of kids wanting to hear a band. And of course it had Christian lyrics to it. And it was called the Jesus Movement, where there were just, every week, people were coming to ask Jesus to come into their heart, and a real revival broke out in that school. And, but Dad relapsed, and everything just came to a screeching halt. We were asked to leave the church. I was asked to leave the church, and the band just kind of dismantled. And
so 2 questions at this point. One, what was your dad like when he relapsed or when he was drinking?
A total personality change. Total personality change. He would drink, pass out, drink, pass out, drink, pass out, drink, pass out. And there time he wouldn't eat for a month. Wow. He would just like trying to shut himself, brain off everything, because he could not live up to what he was preaching. He couldn't. And I think he carried a whole lot of shame himself. But, when he was sober and preaching and caring for people and visiting people, and he worked really hard to be a good pastor and to try to make up for the way that he fell the last time, and then it would last a little bit and then he'd fall off the wagon again. But when he drank, he was not a kind guy. He was not. And we just kind of all stayed away from him. And by that time, all my brothers were gone except for me and my little brother and Mom. And he would just stay in the back room.
And then, so you've had this repeated experience of the church telling you just to leave. So, looking back, how would you describe what that is doing to you as a kid?
You don't trust people. They'll turn on you in a heartbeat. And you certainly can't tell them what's going on inside of you. And so you're just kind of empty and hollow. And you go through the motions, and he's sober and he's pastoring again, and you go, but you don't trust him.
Yeah. To what degree would you think, you kind of alluded to this a minute ago, but to what degree would you think that the kinds of things your father is preaching is driving his own relapses?
Oh, big time. Big time. He would preach against drinking. He'd preach against smoking, and he smoked his whole until he died, and he preached against things, and then he would go out and do it. And I know, later on that he hated himself because he was preaching something he couldn't live up to, and he made all of us feel guilty about everything.
So his own preaching is a sort of act of self-flagellation and self-hatred.
Right.
I want to go back to what you said a minute ago about your father being the face of God. In what way did his own sense of shame that you suspect that he was carrying, or this kind of overly impossible moralistic set of demands that he's preaching, how does that become God to you?
Well, it was him. He was this charismatic guy that would stand up and talk about God, and I was so impressed by him when I was little. And he was the first face of God. The first face I got was him. And then when he relapsed, and then unfortunately, we had to lie. From 7 years on, when he would relapse, we had to lie. I had to go lie and tell everybody, oh, he's doing good, and no, he's not drinking. And so it just tears apart your soul when you're a kid, and you're not supposed to lie. But your household is you've got to protect this guy.
Yeah.
And so you've got to lie. And I was going against everything that they taught me. And so lying it got easier. It just got easier, and it was almost like it was expected but that's when 7 years on and everything just started getting cracks in it. And then the way people would turn against me and mom and dad, I mean, when he would relapse, and the people that he poured himself into just said, we don't want you here, and walk away.
Yeah.
So when you're a kid, none of that makes sense.
Your two brothers, you said your two brothers go off to Vietnam. What's it like for them when they return?
Well, they were just different. I mean, they were 2 years apart, and one goes to Vietnam when he was 19. And then when next to the oldest brother, a brother above me, and they didn't talk for 10 years. I mean, with family gatherings, they would just kind of sit there and, try to participate in conversations. But it was 10 years before they started telling us what went on in the war and what they saw. And during that time, it was the first war fought on television. And I remember, mom and dad had a little black and white TV, and they would watch Walter Cronkite every night at 5:30 as they were carrying bodies out to see if they could see their. And so when my brothers came home, they were not my brothers, the guys that I knew. They were just different. And they pulled away from everything. And so whatever was going on in our home, they were dealing with their own demons. So no, they just stayed away pretty much.
Yeah. So there you're back in Arkansas, and you started this band. At some point, you get connected with the Imperials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were contemporary Christian music was nobody knew what it was because it hadn't been. Larry Norman hadn't come out with anything yet. So we were taking Beatles songs and rewriting them, and they were horrible. I want to hold God's hand. I want to hold God's hand.
Oh.
So you had us with, loud guitars and drums, and then the next thing was the Happy Goodmans or the Statesman Quartet.
Yeah.
So we were trying to bring in the Imperials. We're kind of in the middle. They were doing some, a little more aggressive than just Southern gospel. So we raised money and did car washes and all kind of stuff, and raised enough money to bring them in. And they let my little band do 20 minutes before they came on.
Opening for them.
And we did, 5 songs? I forget what it was. And it's funny, though. I knew they were going to pull us up for the encore, and I was going to get to stand up there with them. And so I had a friend that was very, very shy, and I gave him that little camera, that long one that had the 4 bulbs that would flash. And so I'm up there with him and doing one song, the big encore, and he jumps up and takes one picture and sets back down. And I knew I had 3 more shots left, and I was trying to, come on. And he was too shy to get up and do it. So I ran to Kmart, took a week, to get him back, and I'm thumbing through it, and I found the photo, and it's 9 guys waist down. My first contact with professional gospel music, 9 guys waist down.
The budding showman knows
Yeah.
what a wasted opportunity it was.
So the band broke up. We were all 18, couldn't get along.
Huh.
And so there was an evangelist that had heard me sing, but I'd met him, and he did what he said. He was a man of integrity. And if he told you something, he would do it.
Huh.
And he asked me to start traveling with him when I was 19. And, I would drive the van and go pick him up at the airport, take him to the hotel, and I'd go to the little conference room at the Holiday Inn, set up the little sound system, and then I would take my acoustic and sing some songs, and he would get up and preach. But and then I'd drive back to Fort Worth, where I had to move to be with him. But he was he told me the truth, and he was. I mean, I'd never been around a man around Christianity that he did what he said, and whatever he preached, he did. And disciplined about it. And so he began to teach me those principles too, of how to be an honorable man. So I started traveling with him, and I was dating Tori. I met her. I was working on a farm, and they had a little pavilion that we started having church on Sundays. And so, again, I would lead songs and that sort of thing. And I had a little, it was a camp during the summer. So then we would have church in that pavilion. It wasn't that many. It was a small little church. And I did a weekend retreat. There were bunkhouses, and there wasn't that many people. But she came walking in the back door, and my world stopped. I mean, my world stopped. And she was funny and witty, and we laughed a lot. And so we started dating, and I would drive back from Fort Worth and, to Hot Springs and spend, when I wasn't on the road with the preacher, I would spend Friday night, Saturday, and then drive back Sunday night and go back to work Monday. But we were talking about getting married, but there was just no money, and she knew my heart. Music was my passion, and I didn't know if I was good enough, but I wanted to try. I didn't know how far. Nobody from our town had done anything before, and she just encouraged me that let's wait to get married. Let's wait to get married, and I'll be with you and support you in whatever way I can. And we were gonna move to Fort Worth because I was making like $100 a week, kind of a thing, and but it was somehow the Imperials tracked me down to Fort Worth. I don't know how, because it wasn't Hot Springs where we booked the show and that sort of thing. But they said, "Would you come to Nashville and try out?" And I drive to Nashville. And my little Pinto didn't realize at the time that it's a firebox, that if I ever got rear-ended, my life's over. But and they hired me that night. So instead of moving to Fort Worth, I was out on the road 3 weeks prior to us getting married. And so she and her parents came and found an apartment, that sort of thing. And because it's a small town, I flew back in after 3 weeks. They opened up the courthouse on a Sunday, Hot Springs, small town, and we got married, and had to turn right around and head back to Nashville because, we got married. The only day available was Halloween, and so I never forget my anniversary. I never forget. So, and I climbed on a bus and just started. But man, it was like taking a fire hose and sticking it in my mouth and turning it on full blast.
Because you're just like on the road all the time.
Yeah, and I'm in a world I know nothing about, and you can't go to college and figure out how to do this. And so there were all kind of emotion. There was excitement. There was fear. Singing to crowds. I mean, I think the largest crowd I ever sang to was 200 people. And all of a sudden, my first night with them, there's 6,000. I sang with my eyes closed. I was so scared. And so...
And you're 19.
Well, I was 22 at the
22,
time.
okay.
It was 1976, and I was 22. And I just started traveling with them, and they were old school. And we were on the road 290 days a year.
Wow. And
come home and... but because we didn't have kids, Tori could travel with me. Tori is my wife's name. And so she loved the band. She loved the bus. And we had so much fun just being kids out there. And then 5 years later, it's time to go solo. And again, I just have to climb on a bus because radio, they have a station in Philadelphia. They have one in Dallas and one in San Jose. And not connected at all. And so the only way to break a record or break singles is just climb on that bus and travel. But thank God she loved the bus, she loved the bands, and we had so much fun. We were young and just digging this life. And so she just traveled with me for almost 15 years till we started a family.
Now, I understand that you one significant development in your story, you began drinking at some point on the bus?
Yeah. It was actually, I never touched liquor because of my dad.
Yeah.
I never drank at all. In fact, I would go play golf with my buddies here. And when we'd finish up 18, they'd have a Bud Light and I'd get a Coke and we would go home. But those voices of shame constantly, you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. And I remember I was 24 when I won my first Grammy. And you're at the party and, we're staying at the Biltmore and Shrine Auditorium in this big whole production and stuff. And we win. And we go back to the hotel after the parties, Tori and I. And by the time I got back to the hotel, they gave this to the wrong person. I don't deserve this. I'm not good enough for this. And within an hour, all the joy's gone. And they gave it to the wrong person. And I don't deserve to be in front of all these people. I'm not good enough. Just that you'll never amount to anything. You'll never be good enough. And you're not worth the salt and that sort of thing. And so I would stand and sing in front of so many people. And I'd go back to the bus, and it's like I'm a fraud. They don't know that I'm not that good, that I will never amount to anything, but here I am, and nothing makes sense. It's all just, why is this happening? And honest to God, it was like my brain was being pulled apart. Nothing made sense because I felt horrible, and that religion taught me to hate myself, but yet I'm having all this success. And my wife's brother played with the New York Philharmonic. And he was an oboe player, got his doctorate from Yale, and his wife danced with the American Ballet Theater. And I'd never been to New York. And so we go for 10 days. And it's July, and they have the fifth floor of an old apartment building down in the village, and it was so dadgum hot. But, Tori was dragging me to museums. I'd never seen museums. And I went with her to the ballet, and I saw Baryshnikov. And, I knew nothing about that. But and Cynthia Gregory was a woman and I was just mesmerized that the human body could do that. And then, I go here, the New York Philharmonic, and I'd never heard classical music. And I got goosebumps. I mean, it was just so, but there again, I never could shake, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. And I devalued myself. I don't belong here. And eventually it's going to catch up to me, and they're going to ask me to go back to wherever. And so I was 26, and I was the fifth floor apartment in July, and it was hot. And Tori was out shopping. I think she's at Bloomingdale's, and Cree and Joel, they're at rehearsal at their different, the symphony and the ballet. And I'm alone in the apartment. Now, beer was not a taboo. I mean, my buddies drank it, and my pastor even back then would have wine with dinner. So there wasn't like this big, I'd shaken a lot of that Pentecostalism. And so I'm in the apartment by myself, and there's no more Cokes, which I drank, I drank, but there were 3 Heinekens in the refrigerator. And it wasn't like this voice screaming, no, 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 no. It was because my dad drank vodka. So this is just beer, And so I opened a can, Heineken. I never tasted beer before. And I drank it, like half of it. And I turned it up because it was so hot. And I hated the taste of it. But I finished it. Within 5, 6, 7 minutes, those voices got quieter. And I immediately had the second one, and the voices got even quieter. And by the third one, those condemning voices were gone. And I looked up toward heaven, and I began to thank God, I can live this way. This must be the way normal people feel. And but immediately, I started hiding. My buddies didn't hide when they had a beer, but immediately I started hiding in that euphoria of those voices being silent, and I could stand on that stage. Now I did my doggone, I won't use my AA language, but things began to shift in my brain, and I could stand and sing. And with no condemnation in my head. And man, I would throw my head back because those voices were silent. And not knowing that within a short amount of time, it's going to turn on me. I got daddy's gene. I've had 3 brothers die from addiction later on. Of course, dad never sobered up. And so within 3 or 4 months, hiding, and having it in the back of the bus as soon as the concert was over, I would head back there. And you talking about hating yourself. I turned into my dad. And I got to a point I would try to shave. And if I tear up, just without looking myself in the eye, because I hated me. I turned into the thing I hated in him. Now I'm doing it. And so it went on for a long time of just hiding. I never drank around anybody. I was a closet drinker, and I would wait till I was alone, and or I would wait till my wife went to bed and asleep, and then I would, I'd finish off that bottle of gin, and I would sneak in. I just wanted to be numb. I just wanted to be numb. Never liked the taste of any of it, but it made me numb because I hated myself. I'll never amount to anything. And all of these voices, they were magnified by 10,000 now. And I would stand on stage and sing gospel music and just felt like the biggest hypocrite in the world. And I would beg God. I mean, I would beg him, please help me, please help me, please help me. And knew nothing about AA or that. But anyway, it led me down a road for almost 6 years of just self-hatred, self-loathing. I wanted to be numb all the time. And the band started seeing my personality change. And Tori knows something horrible is going on with me because I just detached from everybody. So, yeah, I was in quite a mess, I didn't know you could hate yourself that much. Because I went against everything I sang about, everything I believed, my higher power that was Jesus. But I felt like I was really letting him down. And everywhere I turned, it was just a mess. And I did not know what to do. I'm trapped. I can't stop drinking. I'm terrified people are going to find out. And I would do my best not to drink for a show. But it would be waiting at the hotel for me. And I could not wait to get back and shut my brain off. I just wanted to be numb all the time. And never hurt my singing. You know, I just kept getting better, winning more Grammys. And but you go when it's over and you hate yourself. So you're not enjoying anything, nothing.
And then at what point did you begin to try to get help or change of course?
In Arkansas, when I left home and Mom and Dad moved back to California because they threw him out of that church, my senior high teacher, my last year, she saw my grades plummeting and my body just began to betray me because of the stress. And she saw something going on. And they had fostered kids come into their home. And she asked me, she said, do you think you could move in with us just to get out of that family system? Because your body is just betraying you. And so I moved in with them. And of course, they actually were my family by choice, but they didn't know what was going on with me. They just saw me again changing and trying to stay away from everybody. But
so you had stayed in touch with them through
all
these years.
Yeah. Thanksgiving, Christmas, but I would do my best not to drink at all because I didn't want on breath. But as soon as it was over, I'd have a fight with Tori so I could leave. But one day she confronted me and she said, Russ, I think you have a problem. And I think you're an alcoholic. Now that broke my heart because your mother, you know, that you loved. But I don't know if I'd have heard it from anybody else. I still didn't sober up. I just left, you know, but there was a friend that kind of saw what was going on, and we were friends. And I finally confided in him everything that I was doing. And he was safe from me. He wasn't, you know, going to First Baptist Church. He was just a regular guy, but had a whole lot of wisdom. And we began to talk. And he said, have you ever thought about going to AA? And no. And well, why not? Well, if I go there, here I am, this highly decorated gospel singer. And if I'm spotted and it gets out, then, you know, back this town could not be kind at times. You know, you remember those years. And so I hesitated, but it got so bad. My wife was going to leave me, and we didn't have kids yet, but so I was supposed to tour Australia for a 30-day tour in Australia, but my wife had just said, I'm leaving, you know, unless you get help. So my manager canceled that tour, and I went into treatment. But I started going to AA some. Sitting in the back with a hat pulled down low. But I started hearing stuff, you know, and I was like, that's my story. Well, that's my story. And all of a sudden, I began to understand that's me. That's what they're talking about is me. So anyway, I go to treatment in Knoxville. They didn't want me. I didn't want to be in Nashville here. There was Cumberland Heights, what I went to later, and went to that treatment center there. I had to make several trips through treatment centers to get a hold of this, but I don't know, you know, and they had just destroyed how I felt about Jesus with all of the garbage and everything that they poured into it. Now, I ate that 13-year-old boy that would go down and talk to him. We developed some kind of friendship outside of everything else. No religion, you know, nothing like that. It was just he and I sitting and talking. So I I began to face what I was doing. And there were people there were therapists there that could talk to me about what was going on in me that scared the crap out of me. And I ran from myself. And so I come back and I start going to AA. And before I went to treatment, I want to throw something in here because you're talking about acceptance, which I hid from all the time. Even when I wasn't, I hid. But I'd been in AA before I went to treatment, I think 3 weeks. And those people were working with me, man. And I'd never known acceptance like this. I mean, they didn't judge me. They treated me like one of them, and they just brought me in and put their arms around me. And for the first time, I was with a group that I felt safe with, that I could say what was going on inside of me. So anyway, 3 weeks. And I got a sponsor, and you know what a sponsor is. I'm sure your audience does too. But I relapsed after 3 weeks. And these people had really worked with me. I mean, really, and my sponsor, going to Shoney's or Denny's after AA meetings and drinking coffee and just picking their brain. Well, I relapsed. There was a whole lot of childhood trauma that would have to be dealt with later in order for me to stay sober. And I relapsed. So I talked to my sponsor. I was so humiliated. And here comes all that shame and guilt again. I failed. And he said, all right, the next meeting, there is a silver chip called a desire chip in AA. And if you want to try this way of life again, or for the first time, you go forward and they have a chip system there. And you take this chip, say, I want to try to stay sober 24 hours. And so at the end of the meeting, I stand up, and a lot of these people, they had worked with me, and I was so humiliated. And all of that childhood shame, all of these all came back. I mean, I failed. And I walked to the front, my back to the people, and I took my little white chip, and I was going to have to turn around and face them. And it's like, how can I get back to my seat with my eyes closed? But when I turned around, they applauded and clapping. Try it again, Russ. Come on, Russ, try it again. And they just encouraged me and loved me. And I'd never been around people that just embrace you with your warts, your bruises, and your faults. And they just embraced me. And man, that was infectious. I'd never had that in my life. So that was the start of trying a new way of life.
Yeah. You mentioned that later you'd have to learn to finally deal with the childhood trauma. Can you kind of tell us some of the things you had to learn or let go of or embrace in you to do that?
Mm-hmm. I went through treatment. I got into AA, and I had an incredible sponsor. I mean, he had been sober longer than me, and he would let me cry and talk and kick my butt when he needed to. But there were two of them actually, and they just worked with me and made themselves available. And I was doing good. I had 10 years sobriety, and I was growing and I was changing. But all of this childhood stuff had never been dealt with. All the shame and everything that was poured up. And I go out to California where my dad had passed away. And I'm standing at his casket looking at it. And you're supposed to love him because he's your dad, but you hate him. And there's just like this eruption goes off in your brain. I love him, I hate him, I love him, I hate him. And my brain just starts spinning out like this. And I know within 10 minutes or less, it's all going to go away. So I go buy a fifth of whiskey, and it all goes away, but I blew my world up again. Absolutely blew my world up again. And having to start from scratch, back to treatment. And I get things worked out with my wife and all of that. And thank God the kids hadn't come yet. But I had 9 years. And my mother dies. And I go back out there, and again, I'm standing at the casket. She's your mother. You're supposed to love her. But then why did you put us through that? Why didn't you rescue us? Why did you let him do what he did to us and what you did to us and what you did to me? 12 years old and I just my brain just starts, and I knew with the fifth of whiskey it'd all go away. And you can't think about 2 weeks from now. You can't. All you think about is right now, and this is so intense I can't deal with it. So another fifth of whiskey, my world blows up again, and I'm back in treatment, and thank God for Cumberland Heights. Had to get my degree from there several times. But a therapist that I've been in therapy most of my adult life. And thank God I wouldn't be sitting here without that. But she told me, she said, until we deal with your childhood trauma, you will never stay sober. Every time a family member dies or every time all that's triggered from you, you're going to relapse. She said, there is this place in Santa Fe, New Mexico called Life Healing Center. And it's dual diagnosis, childhood trauma and addiction. Now, I was going to have to cancel dates, but everything was on the line. I was about to lose everything again. My band didn't want to go out with me anymore because I wasn't mean. I was just detached. I never saw them until I walked out on stage. And Tori, she just had enough. So I go to this place, and for 2 weeks, it was like 6 therapists for 20 people. It was intense. And when I got there, they said, draw a picture of your higher power because you're going to need them. And in AA, you're not going to stay sober without higher power. But in AA, it's not, if you're Jewish, you've got your higher power. If you're Muslim, you got to have a higher power. And of course, mine has always been Jesus. That's the one I've always related to. So they said, draw a picture of your higher power. You're going to need him in a few weeks. And so I drew this stick figure of Jesus and I put him in my room. And it's group therapy, it's singles therapy, and again, just starting to dig down in there. And after 2 weeks of that, the head therapist, brilliant guy, he said, okay, Russ, bring your picture of your higher power today. You're going to need him. And the only way I can describe it is like if that wall over there is stacked with gum wrappers, just gum wrappers, you throw the gum wrappers over there, and it's all the way up to the top. And somehow they had built a filter inside of me that was ready to deal with all of that. And started after 2 weeks, and they said, let's go back to your earliest memory, what you can remember. And I remember being 3 and my mother slapping me to the ground, shaming me. And then when other memories kind of start coming, once you let that out, because you don't remember a lot from that trauma from your childhood, but they'd run that through the filter and lay it over there. And here's another memory, run it through this filter and lay it over there. I did that for 3 weeks, crying my eyes out every day, just memory after memory after memory. And after 3 weeks, all the gum wrappers were gone. And I didn't hate my parents anymore. I saw them as victims, just like me. And when all of that was eliminated from your thing that just held you constantly in your brain, and I don't know, there's peace. There's just peace. Because all of those things that drive me to drink when he died and all of that, it was dealt with. It's like, and I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And they knew that was going to happen. That's why they kept doing this, group therapy, singles therapy. And then once they started, and it just began to pour out of me memory after memory after memory. And when I left that place, I saw my parents as victims. And I accepted who they were. And I began to get acceptance of who I was. You know, yeah, I failed. I did. So, okay, so I did, you know. So that was the start of this journey of just getting better and having great people around me, great sponsors around me. I call him my spiritual dad. He's a preacher in Texas. And, you know, he's the guy I go to when I have spiritual, you know, questions and things like that. But I had no idea life could be this good. I've been sober 20 years, and I had no idea you could be this happy. I couldn't even imagine that. But I'm more in love with my wife than I've ever been. I mean, we were at a movie last night, you know, and we've been married 48 years, and we're cuddled up in one of those, you know, reclining chairs and stuff, watching this Tom Hanks movie, and like teenagers just cuddling each other, you know. But I don't know, my life, my kids, I'm just content. I didn't know this was possible. Just did not know this is possible with my higher power and with my brothers in AA and consistently working and growing and changing and letting go and letting go and letting go. But it's nice at 70. You're sitting here and you're happier than you've ever been in your life, and that you were brave enough to face it.
Yeah. Thank you. And you're celebrating a brand new album.
Yeah.
Cover story. 70 with a brand new album. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
Different kind of album for you.
Yes, very much so.
Tell us about the genesis of how this came to be.
Well, it was by accident, just absolutely by accident. Steve Taylor, which you're very good friends with him, he had a band in the 80s called Chagall Guevara. And they never really toured, but they did several records. And they were having a 30-year reunion at the Ryman.
I was there that night.
Oh, were you really?
Yeah, it was
okay. I mean, people come from all over the place, London and all of this. And so I'd never seen him live. And I'd never seen Steve Taylor live. And
He's amazing.
Good Lord, man. He made Mick Jagger look really old.
I've told so many people about how, you know, what, an hour and a half into that show, he's doing a cartwheel across the stage.
Wow. I was mesmerized, and just watching them and the bands, Dave Perkins and Lynn and John Painter. And I was just sitting there going, my Lord of mercy. And Steve, and you know more than me because you've known him longer, is probably one of the most creative people I've met. And if you're friends with him, then you're creative also. He surrounds himself with creative people. So after the concert, they were having like an afterglow the next night, Monday night. And they invited me if I wanted to, asked me if I would sing. The band didn't play anymore. Some of the band members played in the band. But Kevin Max was there, Ashley Cleveland, and me, and a couple of others. But I was supposed to do Down in the Lowlands with Charlie Peacock, who, my self-titled record, I recorded that song, Charlie Peacock song, and he came out and sang with me on that record in 1987. So he got sick and he couldn't come. And so I was just going to, hang. And I mean, I love these artists that were there. Ashley Cleveland, that woman.
She's wonderful.
So But Jimmy Abegg, who's Steve's for a while, his band leader back then, and he was kind of putting up the band, and he came to me and he said, Russ, he said, let's go ahead and do Down in the Lowlands. Now, Charlie's sick and he can't come, but let's do it more blues. And when you've been doing this for 48 years, it's like you haven't got anything to prove and you fell flat on your face. Who cares? You know, I don't care. And so he said, let's just do it more blues. And we'll just turn it into something that it's never been before. All right. And we get out there and count off and went into the song. And it had a more of a soulful groove than the record did. And, you know, verse, chorus, solo, throwing them all around, you know, solo. And Jimmy Abegg came to me, he's standing beside me, he goes, get out there and do something. And I said, what, Jimmy? He goes, I don't know, just get out there and do something. So unrehearsed or whatever, I just go out there and I start ad-libbing. Lyrically, musically, I just started ad-libbing. And then after a while, I turned into a black preacher. And I was just singing out lyrics and, you know, and really, really going for it. It felt good. I couldn't duplicate it again if I had to. I couldn't. And so when it was over, my Lord, the place was just erupting. And I go backstage and the band's there and they said, we got to make a record. Well, I've heard that before, you know, and you have too. People say, we're going to do this with you. We're going to do this with you. And it sounds good, but sometimes it just doesn't pan out. And well, man, that'd be great if it happens. But there was a guy there that said, I will fund this record. And he gave us $70,000 to make this record. And he asked Steve if he would executive produce it. And Steve said yes. He said yes. And so John Painter produced it. And Steve was like, the three of us got together and we just started throwing songs in. Didn't write any of them. They're all cover songs from stuff that I used, part of my journey that I just told you about, pieces of my journey and places and songs that just kind of fit that. And we threw in, I don't know, we probably had 15 songs or something, and we started editing down to 11. But we were just a little ways into this record, and it wasn't like anything I'd ever done before. I mean, I'm an old soldier. I like certain mics, certain preamps, and all of that. And Steve said, well, you've done that. Let's try something else. Okay. And they wanted something flat, you know, that I'm putting my hand right in front of my face. That's what they were looking for. But we didn't track it with a band. We did, John Painter would like play piano with a snare or click. And I would sing it. And the next song, kind of the same way. And they said, well, you know, like I used to, that you can go back and then once we get everything on it, and then you can sing it again. And they lied to me. So we had finished a couple of vocals, and I said, well, now, Steve, when am I going to be able to go back and sing them again with me? He goes, you're not. He said, we got just exactly what we wanted. It's innocent. It's raw. It's not thought through. He said, some of these you were holding a lyric while you were singing it. He said, but that's what we want. We want something that's unlike anything you've ever done before. And the album sounds like a band playing on it with horns, you know. And I had to do some real soul searching. Because it took a lot of faith for me to go say, okay, Steve, you know, I'm going to trust you with this. And I had a meltdown one day, just a meltdown. Because I couldn't see the finished product. Steve could. I couldn't. And I really had a meltdown. I was on the phone with Steve. I don't know if I want to do this. You know, it doesn't feel right. It just feels so outside the boundaries of anything I've ever done. And he said, Russ, just trust me. I won't let you embarrass yourself. And so we began to build these songs. But out of that meltdown, there's a song by the Nationals called
Demons.
Demons. And that is exactly what happened to me. All this therapy, all this thing. But as soon as I was triggered, I fell right back down into that pit with all this stuff, and it's like knee jerk. I'm back down there. And so Steve played me that song and I go, that's just what I did. And so there's that song that just,
I wondered listening to that one, if that was kind of like, almost like it's not the title track, obviously, but it's almost like it's like thematically the title track. It seems.
It really is, because it's the journey, relapses, and trying this, that, another thing. But when you have somebody that you respect and you trust, and he said, I won't let you embarrass yourself, because I'm walking down a road I've never walked down before musically.
Yeah.
And you know how you hear everything. It's not like stack, 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 stack. It's what most of my records were like. And so as it began to come together, and each song that we picked was just, the opening song is Tear This Building Down. And it was actually written in 1916. My mother had a record of Blind Willie Johnson, a black guy, who recorded it in the late 40s, early 50s. And it tells the story about Samson and Delilah. And if I had my way, I'd tear this building down. And it was cathartic for me, because that's what I wanted to do. And I just tore it all down. And it goes from that into a Bill Withers tune called Grandma's Hands. And my grandmother was until I was 12, was the only safe place for me that I could talk just a little bit. And she knew what was going on. And she would just say, baby, it's going to be okay. Baby, it's going to be okay. And it was that voice in my ear of her. And so...
And I noticed that you changed Bill Withers' lyrics just a bit to make it autobiographical.
Yeah. My grandmother's name and my mother's name, and kind of singing it to her, because of the role that she played. But each song, what's the next one? When Love Comes In? What was the next one?
Let's see. Depeche Mode, People Are People, was like the third or fourth track, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with that one.
Yeah. It was. I think Steve brought that, or John. I'm trying to remember.
I can't understand what makes a man hate another man. Help me understand.
Well, it has been a whole lot for me of forgiving people, and burying old things, and especially in this climate that this country in. It's like, we should get along. We should get along. And that is something that I've been saying from the stage for a long time, of why are we fighting? Why are we at each other? We are all children of God. Why aren't we getting along? So when I heard that, I'd heard it in the 80s, but when Steve brought that back up, it's like, man, that lyric is so timely, and again, fits my story.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that after I listened through the album the first time, I sent a text to Steve that started with an expletive, because I just thought it was so good. It deserved an expletive, because it's really moving and really beautiful.
Oh man, well,
congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
It's really great. I want to end with one last question. You've used the word wisdom twice. I think early in the interview you said that there are a lot of people in that childhood church context who loved God but lacked wisdom. And then I don't remember who you were referring to later, but someone who came into your life in a constructive, helpful way, loving way, and you spoke of his wisdom. What's kind of a pursuit of wisdom meant to you? What's it looked like? Or how might you close by encouraging others to pursue whatever that might mean?
Well, to pursue wisdom, you have to let go of what you perceive. And it's almost like you got to die to self to change. Because when I think I got it all figured out, I'm so dangerous, But wisdom has been the thing that saved me, and letting go of those old thoughts, those old memories, and wisdom for me has been help me identify why I did what I did. Help me see that part of me that would fight for control when I needed to surrender and let somebody else help me. It took a whole lot for me to say, I need help. But that was my wisdom, because I saw just how me driving this truck, I ran it in the ditch. All right, I'm not a good driver. I need help. And I began to see wisdom as a way out for me. And the wisdom of in that tiny little church and what they preached to me, but wisdom, I was able to see through it. But again, I had to let go of that to embrace wisdom. And with that man I was talking about, that minister that told me the truth, and he walked integrity, and he showed me wisdom of my words, and wisdom of telling something and following through. But I mean, it's tricky, because as soon as you say I got it all figured out, my gosh, But wisdom for me is being able to look at something, look at it from all the sides. Now, where am I getting in the way with myself? What do I need to let go here so I can pick this up? Because I am constantly changing. Even after 20 years of sobriety, I'm still changing. I'm still pursuing truth. I'm still pursuing wisdom, and I want to be better, and I've got to have more wisdom to get better. But it's become an important word for me. It really has. It's wisdom and knowledge. And that Old Testament about when Solomon, when God said, what you want, I'll give it to you. And he said, I want wisdom and I want knowledge. And that has been one of the things that has saved my butt, is wisdom and knowledge, to try to figure out why am I doing what I'm doing, and not just continue to do it hoping it gets better. I hope I'm answering your question. I'm just kind of...
Yeah, you are. Yep. It's a beautiful picture for us to end on. We've been talking to Russ Taff, many decades into a beautiful career in music, celebrating a brand new album cover story. And Russ, I can say that Buddy Green, for all 10 years ago, saying you need to sit down with Russ Taff, was exactly right. It's been a delight to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me be on your show.
Thank you. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriet Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. And special thanks to Andy Gullahorn and Steve Taylor. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.